Toby, just first of all, reflections on the performance out in Galway.
Well, we couldn't have made it harder from the get-go, to be fair. So, yeah, I mean, there's a learning in that from, we've got a much different team, a lot of young players, some people that have not played for the Ospreys before. And, there's a lot to be said about how you start the game. When you go to Connaught, it's going to always be tough. That's historically, they always start fast. That's the negative side. And some of the stuff that we conceded was pretty rudimentary, to be fair. There's some fix-ups that are required on a individual basis, but the fact that we rallied to get at least a losing bonus point or a 4-try bonus point tells something about the identity of the team, and we probably deserve to get 2 points, if I'm honest, by the end of it, as a result. But you don't always get what you deserve, and staring down the barrel at 27-3 or whatever it was, then we can't be too disappointed to get one. So I think it's a good character reference. It's a good benchmark to where we are. We've had to, maybe the fact of how we've trained and the numbers that we've got means you can't always replicate game intensity. So we probably were guilty of not deliberately feeling our way in, but we probably were shocked a little bit, I think. And the good thing is that we sort of rallied and found a way to get ourselves back in the game, which is the thing that we want to obviously pride ourselves on, that we will compete on every play. So that's probably my summation of it all.
Yeah, could have gone couldn't have gone far worse, because I remember the game 2 years ago out in the wind out there. I think it was November time. Yeah, and they just kicked on. So you must take, as you say, a bit of pride in that.
Yeah, that game we got absolutely demolished, and there were no answers. Where this game, there were answers, and the encouraging thing was those answers came a lot from an energy and effort point of view from a lot of young players that came off the bench, and we acknowledged that this morning in our team meeting, and we actually managed the game well. I think the difference in those two fixtures, the one that you mentioned, well, I think we weren't prepared to stand in front of them and compete for long enough in that game. Whereas this one we did, and found a way to muscle our way back in. So that there's some good shoots of performance there that we need to nurture and keep pushing forward.
You've mentioned it already. I know you alluded to it last week. The strain on replicating match intensity. That's likely to be a common theme this year.
I think so. Certainly when your international boys aren't around.
Yeah.
And when they're on rest periods, obviously coming back from international duty, and it's not about your resources, your physical resources, your playing resources under a bit of pressure, right? So we were looking at creative ways of how we train, how we can get more people into the building, how we can be more competitive. But if you can't do live scrums, you can't do live scrums. If you haven't got the personnel, you can't do them. So, we've had one game where we've only realistically had 3 props, and now we're back to at least 4. Now we've got 5 this week, I think. So we're in a better place week on week. But yeah, we're going to have to get used to this, because it's the new norm, and we have to put our heads together and look how we can solve and mimic the game pressure, and not just, as I say, learn through experience on match day, because that's a tough way to learn for sure.
Zebre now, obviously, that's obviously a crucial one. That goes without saying at home. How do you view them? We saw Benetton beating Cardiff with a depleted, if I say 15, but their bench came to the fore. Definitely, that's where you saw their strength, when they could bring, I think it was 6 internationals on.
Yeah, well, we know that obviously international-wise they're back. I think all bar 2, which are injuries. So they'll be at full strength for sure. And yeah, they've changed a bit, to be fair, from last year. Looking at them, they're they're big and strong. They want to come at the front door, and we know that Ulster are a good team with a lot of strength in depth, right? So to play the way they did, that's going to be a big challenge for sure. And we looked at obviously that game intensely, because it's the only real match footage that we've got. And there's a lot of signs of how much they've improved. So the difficult thing will be matching their power, I think, above anything else. And Richard Hodges is there, so there's different sort of defensive formations. You know, he's obviously come from Cardiff, so there's different sort of defensive problems to solve. So yeah, it's a bit of a different puzzle than it has been before, but it certainly looks like a more robust one.
Just a final sort of general one for me. I've heard this being said about this season, the consensus that yes, there'll be difficulties, but at the same time, you'll have a lot of players that wouldn't have had exposure on the field. Do you agree with that, or is that a naive assessment at the same time?
Well, I know what the article you're referencing. So yeah, I think that I think there's a balance in there. Not to sort of nail my colours to the cross. I think from my inception of coming here, I was absolutely adamant to grow our own players and give them opportunity. And you can look at your Dowie Lakes and people like that, Morgan Morris, and even more established players that haven't had the opportunity. So Sam Parry, international call up, Gartom, international call up. So we certainly believe in growing our own players, and we've had some good success doing that, and we will continue to do that. So I think we're a little bit further down the curve than maybe others are. I'm not saying that they don't, but we certainly has been deliberate on our behalf. So that's the first point for that. Secondly is, you don't get better just by playing. You need to give young players time to recover, assess, reflect, and be deliberate on what they need to work on, because by their nature, there's more rough edges to knock off. So it's a balance between preparing and training and playing. So that it does provide opportunity, but we're very keen on, with our relationship with Swansea and Swansea Uni, to make sure that we give enough game time to all players, whether they're transition players that are just coming in for the first time or people that need game time. So yeah, playing program is certainly a massive part of it. In relation to the numbers, yes, it's a massive challenge, but we're trying to see the opportunity in it. The opportunity, yes, is to give young players a go, but they still need to be ready. They need to be first team ready. Otherwise, the damage can be quite significant as well. So I think there's a balancing act to it.
Thanks, Toby.
Hi, Toby. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. How are you?
Good. Yeah, very well, thanks. In terms of speaking about exposing players and growing your own, I suppose that one of the toughest learning curves is the front row. You've got a lot of good young talent. I mean, yeah. You talk to me a bit about some of your young props like Gareth Phillips, Ben Warren. How excited are you by their potential?
Yeah, Reece Henry. The three of them are great, and Reece Henry is, as an example, the fact that he's played loose head and tight head at this level shows you that, those props used to be a dying breed. Obviously maybe he's taking his time from Paul James, who's done both here, and he's obviously came out of that stable. So, but it makes you more aware, and it's a great opportunity about exposure. It makes you aware of what you need in both positions. So there's great opportunity come from them. As you say, Ben Warren getting better and better. Gareth Phillips, had a injury strewn probably first 18 months when I met him. But yeah, he's impressed in pairs, and we've got to prepare for the next regime. So you're right. Growing your own is also, an opportunity to make sure that you get the emotional attachment to your region, because that's ultimately in dark times what matters. So I think that young players give energy. Those boys have stood up. They stood up well at the weekend. Yep, they're not the finished article. Duncan Jones is doing obviously a great job from a tutelage point of view. They come out of Paul James's stable, so they're getting a lot of good coaching with a lot of experience, and hopefully that means that these boys will kick on to be first team regulars, and who knows where they go from there.
Yeah, well, they've got a good teacher in Paul James, anyway, haven't they? But
good teaching them how to cheat.
Yeah, yes, that's true. But yeah, in terms of these players, I know they've got a long way to go, but you look at someone like Gareth Thomas. Up until maybe 2 years ago, nobody was talking about him as a potential international. Do you see like international potential in the likes of Ben Warren and Garen Phillips? I know they've still got a lot to learn, but do you sort of see that ceiling in them?
That's a difficult question to ask because ultimately their performance decides, and particularly as a prop, your scrum performance decides. And that's the functional role as a prop it's like the hooker throwing in. You can have all the best, stuff outside of the set piece, but ultimately they have to be able to deliver that to a certain level. Now I know that's a bit of a continuum, but ultimately, you're going to need to do that. So I think that the signs are encouraging. Physically, they can start to live in the world, which is great. But as you can imagine, it's a lot different coming off the bench than it is starting, and that's all an ebb and flow side of things. But physically, that they are getting towards international standards. You talk about Garton. When I came here, that he was recognised as the third choice loosehead, and he reminded me very much of dynamic looseheads that I'd seen in the Premiership, and I was quite surprised that he wasn't further in the pecking order. So his progression into an international player, you've got competition for places at the time. We had Rod Jones, Nicky Smith, and him. I think the competition, and I've had this conversation with the young tight heads this morning, that competition drives you to greater intensity and you can't rest on your laurels, and that competition drives you to be the best you can as soon as you can. So I think all those things combined, it's an exciting time if you're a young prop at the Ospreys, because the one thing that this situation will give you, it'll give you opportunity for sure.
Yeah, in terms of scrummage and being a prop in general, especially in Wales, and there's a lot of emphasis. Listen to a lot of coaches, and they say you need to do more than the scrum in terms of carrying around the fields and stuff. But scrummaging is still the most important part, isn't it? Do you think that perhaps people are losing sight of that? Not at the Ospreys clearly, but in Wales in general, that scrummaging should come first. Because in my old job, I used to cover the English Premiership a lot, and you can guarantee that the tight dead is going to be a really strong scrummage in the Premiership, but maybe not so much in Wales.
Well, I think that you can't. What's the best way to answer this? I think that it really depends on what your attitude towards it is and what you want your game to look like, for sure. So there's going to be a coach preference element to that, or as you say, I come from the English Premiership myself, so the adage was no scrum, no chance, for sure. And if you look at South Africa, probably got the best front row bomb squad, etc., and they're world champions and they're about to take part in another final. So there's a place for it, I think that there's a natural affinity to that from where you're from and also your physical capability. But I make no apologies that, set piece has been definitely part of what I've tried to bring here and treasure here, because you can make, progression up the pitch without making a pass. And in wet weather, that's very important, So people like Tommy Botha, for example, who's a very, very good scrummager, as everyone knows. And he's very important to us, as were the props before him. So we'll always try and keep strength in depth there. And yeah, I personally believe that, you need to be competent for sure. And you need to be, and if you can get in the ascendancy, it makes the rest of the game easy for you. However, what we've also got to do, you can't be a one-trick pony either, because you need to make sure that you've got other threats that put people in pressure in different ways, because then, if the referee doesn't agree with what you're seeing or what they're seeing, and then you can negate yourself as well. And I think, we learned that a little bit last year, to be fair. I think that we were probably guilty of not doing enough in other areas. So hopefully we can be a more rounded team for sure.
Yeah, just finally, can you clear this up for me? Is Tom Botha Welsh qualified now or not?
Yeah,
he is, yeah. You're a bit shocked that he hasn't had a look in with Wales, because he's a really destructive scrummager, and that is obviously an area where Wales maybe aren't as strong as other nations.
I just think it depends on what you want the game to look like. If you're a coach where you think set pieces is really important, like myself, to be the fundamentals of the game, then yeah, he's very important. If you want to do other things or play a little bit looser or treasure different things in a prop, then perhaps he's not everyone's cup of tea. So it really depends on the alignment of what the coach of whatever team is trying to get.
Brilliant. Thanks for answering my questions, Toby, and good luck for the weekend.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Toby, I was just going to check, just logistically, anybody in or out who was from the squad in Galway? Any particular changes?
Yeah. So Nicky Smith is around this weekend.
Oh, yeah.
So we've got him back. He's the only one that's come back, and he asked to be made available, which is good for him and for us. So a little bit more strength in depth there that we talked about. Sam Parry's there or thereabouts. So we'll have to see how he responds to training today. But that's more unlikely than likely. So those are the two sort of fresh faces, if you like. The rest is pretty much similar. The only person that won't be Will Griff, who unfortunately hurt his shoulder and had to leave the pitch, as you saw probably on Saturday.
Yeah, I watched the highlights of the Ulster Zebre game, as you touched on there, and they do seem a slightly different animal. I mean, they got from the flankers got a couple of tries, and Gessie or Jesse on the wing looks a very decent player. And I mean, they've got a long spell without a win, but they've knocked at the door a few times, and they look doing it again.
Yeah, I think the nine's a good player. I think he's busy, and with bigger people, some bigger players, more powerful players, so you're going to be on the front foot and control the ball for a bit longer. So yeah, no, they're going to be a handful for sure. They're absolutely going to be a handful.
Lovely, great as always. Thank you, mate.
Thank you very much. All good?
Yeah, I think that was my question pretty much covered on the last one with Zebre. Really, I was going to ask about that. Really, are they going to pose much of a physical battle? It's a bit of a different sort of challenge for you this week, Toby.
I think that they've looking at what they've done. There's been a lot of maul play in their pre-season games, and in their game against Ulster. So I think that they've certainly put a lot of work into that area, both attacking and defending it. So as you say, I think they're trying to move towards a more traditional Italian team, if you like. I don't mean in recent times, because obviously, but they always used to pride themselves on big physical forwards. So I think there's definitely been, looks like, a shift towards that. And that's probably a reflection on when they've reviewed their season, that they think that that's an area that they need to target. So they've recruited to that. And, as we know, it normally starts and finishes up front. So that's going to be the challenge for us for sure.
And with this game particularly as well, in the league, it's been so competitive and particularly hard this year in general. This is a game particularly where you're going to be looking to be expected to win. How do you kind of sort of approach that in a mindset really with such a young side?
I don't, we expect to perform well and win every single game, but that whole, the dreaded rucksack of expectation normally just makes you drown when you swim. So it fills with water and ends up drowning you. So from my point of view my job is just to think about what we can control in ourselves. And actually, if it's Zebre, Leinster, Ulster, Sharks, doesn't really matter. We prepare well for the challenges. Of course, we'll be specific to an opposition to be certain, but especially early in the season, it's often around doing what you want to do and seeing where you want to do. And the encouraging thing for us last week, and a lot of the things that we worked on through pre-season came out in that game. Certainly not the first 20 minutes, but in relation to some stuff, we've progressed for scoring tries over the 3 years that we've been here, and that's important. We've got to make sure that the defence follows suit, and that's obviously still a challenge. But we were very good at managing the game, which sometimes was a bit of an undoing for us. And as a result, we created some nice stuff. So from that point of view, that's the encouraging thing. And if we continue to do that, we'll be in contests. If we don't, then we won't.